it takes 3 years where you're going to be frustrated and you're probably going to really suck at something. And then 2 or 3 years where you feel like you've adequately paid and you're getting it. And then the last year or two, you're going to have your breakthrough.
Welcome back, investor, to another episode of Passive Income Adventures, where we teach you should go on more adventures and we'll help you figure out how to pay for it, both with time and with money. Today, we have Chris Prefontaine with us from Rhode Island. Chris is a real estate coach, teaching people how to get into real estate to make more passive income, and also that period of time where it's a little bit more front loaded of business. Chris, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got into this business and kind of catch us up to the present day?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been at this 33 years now this year. So I can tell you we won't go through 33 years, but I'll give you the 10,000 foot view. So I went from building homes to doing all kinds of different real estate niches up through the crash of '08. Coming out of the crash of '08, we re-engineered literally everything we do to not deal with banks, not sign personal loans, and buy everything creatively. So creative real estate as a general niche. Then when I say we, it's a family company and we do our own deals in Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Connecticut. And then we started getting demand around 13 or 14, 2013 and 14 to coach it. So it just organically happened. And now we do deals all around North America, mostly United States, with students all buying without banks, without using their own capital, not gobs of it anyway, tiny amounts, if ever, and buying only owner financing, lease purchase in subject to.
Can you tell us a little bit more about those terms that you just defined? I remember my first real estate deal was a subject to. I had no idea what I was doing, but I had taken a course on creative financing
Yeah.
and reached out to the instructors of the course. And I said, "Hey, I've got somebody who's in trouble. They're in default on their loan. What do I do?" And he said, "Well, I think that's probably a sub to. Is it's going to be your first take." And I was just like, "What are you talking about?" So, can you just introduce those concepts for the audience a little bit?
Yeah, so let's go with that one first, just because you opened the door nicely there with the avatar that usually lends itself to that. And so, because I have the opposite when we talk about owner financing. So, subject to if you're listening and you ever bought your own home, you know that there's a settlement statement, and on the settlement statement, your new loan showed up, and that's where the new money came to the table. The only difference when we buy subject to existing loans is the loan that's existing on the seller's property shows up on the settlement statement. You do take ownership of the property. The loan stays in their name. So you will never sign personally. You're not assuming. A lot of people think they equate sub two to assuming means you're going to go applying. You're going to go on that personally. No. So you're going to buy that property and the loan stays in the seller's name. And yes, to your point, Emma, typically, not always, people that need immediate financial relief, and it doesn't necessarily mean they're behind. A lot of them are. Sometimes they just have too many homes. We did one recently. I always like to give examples. One of our students did where the gentleman had a couple hundred grand equity. He just didn't want a third mortgage to be paying. And he's
Yeah.
going to wait on his few hundred grand for some time in the future with no payments and no interest. So there's an owner financing component sometimes to the sub twos. So that's sub two. Owner financing, we niche it down. We do typically free and clear properties in owner financing. So we look, and by the way, I'll give you a number. In the last decade, the free and clear properties in the United States went from like 33% to 39%. Almost 40% of the properties in the United States are free and clear. So it's a great pond to fish in. And when we do that, here's why it's pretty cool. It's a nice recession sort of hedge. We do these and we make monthly principal payments. So the owner financing is real simple. The seller receives the payments instead of the bank. And we typically do terms anywhere from 4 to 20 years. And again, principal only is pretty cool. So let me give you a metric. When you operate a deal and exit with our 3 payday system that I've trademarked, you actually, I'll give you 3 metrics that work all day long with these. If you find a property, doesn't matter what asset class, 200 grand or higher, you get at least 4 year terms and you structure at least a $900 monthly principal only payment. That's a 6 figure deal the way we exit our deals with 3 paydays. That's pretty cool. So how many of those do you need per year to be able to sit back passively at that point and go, okay, cool. I've got these 5 owner financing properties. I did 6 figures in all of them, and they're going to be coming in over the next several months, several years.
Mhm.
Um, the last one is lease purchase. So unlike those two where we're buying them, titles transferring, we're getting all the benefits of tax advantage. The lease purchase is just controlling the property. We literally have a $10 deposit built into all lease agreements, lease purchase agreements. And all we're doing is we're controlling the property. We're going to cloud title with a notice of option so they can't sell it because we don't technically own it. And then we're going to take over the underlying debt by paying on their behalf, just like a sub two, only title didn't transfer. And we can talk about how we exit these later, but that's what a lease purchase is because we offload all the maintenance and everything to our buyers that we put in these homes.
Yeah, I love how you explain that because the subject to, you're going to take title. And in a lease to own or a lease purchase, you're not going to take title. And that's really the major difference between those two. And I think that distinction, I mean, there are a lot of little other nuances, right? But that distinction is really what makes it different there. And I've noticed that, especially like when we started getting into commercial real estate, these creative financing techniques that we were using on some single family homes. I mean, my goal from the beginning was to get into commercial, but I tried and it wasn't really working. So I did a few smaller deals just to get some experience because I was struggling to get partners. I was struggling to get loans with no commercial experience. But then what became really valuable is when we started making these same kind of offers on apartment buildings. It doesn't work
Yeah.
with the really large commercial stuff that you're going to get from a broker, but from the mom and pop or the direct to seller, purchased 2 apartment buildings on a master lease to own. We did our subject to house, and a lot of the commercial deals that we'll do will come in and we'll just have conversations with them. And I find they're a lot more open to the creative financing options than a single family homeowner who's like, is this a scam? What are you trying to pull here? Have you noticed that difference as well between when you're dealing with a homeowner, owner occupied versus like a rental home where the landlord's a little bit more experienced with this stuff?
I'd say I agree by and large. The higher end singles operate the same way too, because the owners tend to be a little bit more financially savvy and probably either
Mm,
has done it, have done it in the past, or know about
mm,
it. I mean, you can get around it when you have the single family owner that doesn't know about it. I let them know it's been around since 1600s before banking.
yeah.
Like it's not new, right? So, and then that usually puts them at ease. And then you can tack on. I'll say this: you can tack on if you're a listener going, "Yeah, I don't know how I'd talk about it." And we can teach you how to talk about it, but you can tack on getting certified by the Creative Financing Real Estate Association. That way, that adds credibility to it. And so, just things
Mm,
like that. But yeah, we you can do any asset class. We literally did a mailing, tiny mailing, and we said, let's add a multi. So let's mail to all the 4 to 10 unit owners, small, and that are free and clear. And we bought 2 that way. I mean, very predictably, you can do that. Any asset class.
mhm. Yeah, I think the free and clear though, I didn't realize the statistic had gone up so high. When I started, it was like a third. That's quite a
Third.
bit.
Yeah. I said that on a show. And the reason I checked, it was like a month ago, 2 months ago now, the host said, well, I bet that went down due to mortgage rates that were when they were really good. And I said, oh, it's interesting. I'll check. And it actually went up by almost,
Yeah.
7 points.
Well, I can see that the reason that it might go up is because interest rates were so low. People didn't get into that refinance fever when things were sitting low and people refinance. But as it starts to bottom out a little bit, and especially once it started to go back up, people are not going to be refinancing. And so they're just like, oh, we'll just pay it off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, back up a little bit. I appreciate you letting us know kind of what you do, what you specialize in. I think it builds credibility with the listener because it's sometimes it's like, why is this person on the show? Like, what do they have to teach me? So I appreciate you kind of letting us know what your specialty is. But let's back up a little bit and take us in time where you were just starting out and some of the decision factors that you went through, the pivot points that you went through, because honestly, we're living a non-traditional non-mainstream thing here. There's some kind of mystery and mystique around real estate investing. The people who do, it's like if people ask, "Oh, what do you do?" I'm a real estate investor, and they're like, "Oh, tell me more about that." Everybody's super interested in it, but not a lot of people are actually doing it. So, can you take us back in time to the younger version of yourself and tell us kind of what got you into this in the first place?
I was always around it. My father had a welding supply business, not real estate, but he would build his own buildings and then lease them
Mm,
back to himself, which I found when I was younger trying to figure that out. But it's really cool if you think about it. So then I was always around it. And then a couple of the first deals I did were either land in house or land. That was always
mhm,
interesting. And again, it was just because what I was exposed to. And then the biggest pivot, though, to your pivot question was after the crash. Because like so many listeners, I thought conventional real estate, get a loan and or get investors. And that's all I did as a broker and investor all those years, all the way up to 2008. So the biggest pivot was, okay, how can we not ever have that happen again? And that was don't sign first lien alone. So the banks, there's nowhere for them to look. They can't, nothing to do with it. And there's a big difference. So going into COVID, we had like 72 properties and none of them were we on a loan. Think about that. And that's a big difference from conventional real estate. So that I would say that in itself is the biggest pivot point.
yeah. Own nothing, control everything.
Yeah. Or own it and not be on the loan. That's the key. As in the first 2
Mhm.
options that you and I talked about, the owner financing and the sub too. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, so you're on title in that case, but not on the mortgage, which
Correct.
reduces your significantly. I did have some help when I got started. Like you said, like my parents had sold several of their houses on lease options
Oh,
when I was
really?
a kid, and I was trying to wrap my head around like how does this work? I remember they were really upset one day because the people either had stopped paying the rent or they had moved out and put somebody else in it without asking my parents, because I know both of those things had happened, but I'm not sure, which this experience but my mom was really upset. She was saying that they were taking advantage of them and that basically being opportunists. And she was pretty upset. And I remember thinking to myself, well, what's going on? And she said they stopped paying the mortgage. I guess the new people stopped paying. I don't remember. And I remember even then, I was probably 11 at the time. And I thought, well, why can't you pay the mortgage? And it was like the first, like, where's your emergency fund? And so for a
Yeah.
long time, I was scared of doing real estate. We had our first house. I'm like, let's rent this house out before we go buy the next one. But what if we didn't have a big emergency fund? And what if what happened to my parents happens to me and they stop paying the rent or stop paying the mortgage?
Yeah.
And so we'd always try and sell our houses on lease option or rent them out. And then we'd always kind of chicken out at the end. And so I finally got to the point 20, 30 years later that I felt like, hey, I want to learn how to do this. And by that point, YouTube and online courses and things were around. And I think I had maybe the opposite experience that you had, like being a little bit scared of it because
Yeah.
watching something that didn't always go according to plan. So how did you learn how to do it like back in the day before YouTube and paid courses and instructors and coaching like we have more access to now?
Way back, just through my father's connections and him. But again, that wasn't his focus, right? So just subdividing land and adding value and flipping, that was the only exposure. And the rest was self study all the way up through, say, that '08 time period. But, depending on what hat I had on as a broker, I went and seeked out a coach. And then when I went to, okay, we got to start doing our condominium conversions, I found someone who did condominium conversions, to just go find someone. This isn't brain science, right? You go find someone who already did it and just model after that.
It's funny.
Always.
I was at a real estate conference, I don't know, last year, and we were talking about what we were doing, and people were like, "Oh yeah, it's a great idea, great idea." And somebody said, "This isn't rocket science."
Yeah.
And in the group, there was a woman who actually was an aerospace engineer who worked on like jet and rocket engines. And she was just standing there nodding her head. She goes, "Yep, that is true. This is not rocket science." I feel
Straight
like a
from the
lot of
source.
people think, yeah, they think that it's rocket science. They think it's so hard. They think it's so risky. And so when you were looking back at it and maybe you didn't have as large of a network around you of people who were actually doing it and being successful, that I think that's really what gave me the confidence after 20, 30 years of being afraid of it, trying it a little and not really having any success was that I was afraid because I hadn't seen some great examples of people who've been successful with it or
Yeah.
maybe a few, but not a lot. Like I started going to my real estate club and I'm surrounded by hundreds of people who are doing this. Where did you get that support or that confidence that you're like, "Hey, I can do this. It's not rocket science."
Probably just 'cause I had seen it now that you ask it that way for so many years, just on the peripheral. But nowadays, I don't care who you are. If you listen to the media, you will be afraid. If you listen, and that's in any market, right? Because they want to create that. But I would also say, get around what you had exposure to, get around a community or at least a person or a small group that can support you and let you know that everyone's on the right track. That's key. There are a lot of educators right now, as you know, Emma, that they sell a lot of stuff and they're good marketers, but unfortunately, there's nothing comes behind it, right? So we've put a super interactive system together for us so that because I know that's what I needed when I started pivoting to find that. You need the support.
Yeah, those examples, I just don't think that there's really a replacement for that example in the network, especially if you're coming from a place of fear. And especially like what you mentioned, that 2008, like we know so many people who say, I lost everything in 2008. And some of
Yeah.
them have come back stronger and they've got better businesses now. But a lot of people who tell me that they'll find out, I didn't meet them at a club. Maybe it's a coworker, a neighbor, or somebody like from a different avenue in our life. And I say, oh yeah, I used to do that. I lost everything in 2008. And they quit. So now they're back in their 9
Oh,
to
wow.
5 and their dreams a
Yeah.
little crushed. So tell me about that experience for you and going through that. Because a lot of us went through it as homeowners. I went through it as a homeowner, but I didn't have any rental properties then. And so tell me what that was like going through it as an investor without all of the support system that is more common today.
Well, you bring up the key point because it was twice in my entire career where I didn't have mentors, and that was one of them. And it didn't dawn on me till like mentally getting out of my own way 3 years later, like into like it was 4 years later into 2012. Where I said, well, wait a minute, that's what was missing here. So then I started going back to my roots of reaching out to people. That was
Mhm.
the missing factor. I'm talking like in 33 years, only twice I didn't have a coach of some sort, and those were when there was some bumps, speed bumps. And so that's precisely what I did. I reached out and did some research online and then just started getting back in the trenches again. And then organically, the family company grew around it, but it was just me at the beginning coming out of
Mhm. Where
February of '08 to February of 12, literally was the gap.
Where did you find your network during that period of time? Because I find these to be like the old school, good old boys. That stuff is still effective. I mean, we talk about online Zoom networking and all of this kind of stuff that we have now, and I think it's fantastic. I've met a lot of people through social media and things like that, but we tend to want to prioritize that newer thing, and we figure it like this old school stuff is still highly effective. So, what were you doing back then, and how much of that is still relevant to how you're meeting people today?
Very similar because it was one-offs. A gentleman that I wrote about in my book who owned a business, a past mentor's sort of protege at the time, reaching out to like literally one-offs, just calling them and chat with them and then reading a book and calling or emailing the author. Nobody does that. And every single one of them will talk to you if you just do that. That's a big one because everyone that's listening here probably does a lot of reading or Audible, right? And and there's a reason they pick up that book, but then they never pursue it. They never pursue the author, and there's no reason not to leave that hanging. They all will to help.
Okay, that's a really good point because I'm finding that podcasting is turning into the same thing where if somebody's
Yeah,
been on enough podcast, or especially like a large podcast where the audience is like, oh, it's hard to get on that podcast, people are not reaching out to the host and they're not reaching out to the guest. But we are putting this stuff out there, not just with the intention to educate, but with the intention to network. And I had an experience recently where I posted about something on LinkedIn and mentioned a book that this concept was in this book. And the author responded on LinkedIn, "Oh, I'm so glad that you liked my book, and I'm so glad that you're enjoying engaging with the
that's
material and
great. Yeah,
put that message out there." And you have that moment where you're like, "Oh, or like posted on my stuff," but they're just regular people. They're just regular people
yeah,
out there trying to network and market themselves and talk to people about what they do. But yet, it's so often overlooked. We have like the new author is the YouTube host or the podcast host, that we're not even reaching out to the authors of the books that we're reading, and most of them would be thrilled to have a conversation with us.
yeah. And to your point, most of our relationships now do come from either me being on a show like this or me having someone on my show, which would be now I don't know what we're up to, over 400 episodes. So I can look back. Most of our joint ventures we're doing as a company now are from this interaction, for sure.
Yeah, I asked somebody once, he pivoted into commercial real estate just after we did, and he was very quickly buying more buildings than we were. And I said, "How are you doing that?" And he says, "If you have the capital from investors, you can buy a lot of really cool stuff, like larger deals." He said, "You're just really limited by the amount of money that you can raise because the deal itself, whether it's a single or a double versus a 50 unit versus a 150 unit, it takes about the same amount of time to take that deal
Yeah,
down. Maybe a little bit more
that's
for the bigger buildings, but not like 150 times more." Right. And I said,
right.
"Well, where are you raising all this money? I mean, you've been doing this even less time than I have." He said, "My podcast, without a doubt, number one, people reach out to me. They say, 'How do I do this? Let's invest together.'" And I
Yeah.
just like, really? A lot of times people say they're too afraid to reach out to somebody after they hear them on a podcast.
Yeah, no, it's key, and it has not replaced. It has added to the whole book and Audible. Yeah,
My husband had an experience once. He was reading, it was historical fiction. It wasn't about business or finances or anything. And he was looking for one of the copies, some edition of it. And so he just reached out on the author's website, and the author called him on the phone and they talked for like 3 hours. It's like now they're best friends. He's telling him all about his divorce. And I think he went to prison for a while. And it's like all this stuff that we're like, had no
yeah,
idea. And he was just thrilled to chat, and then when he found the edition that we were looking for, he called us back to let us know it was there, and that was a testimony to us. Is how I don't know, it probably happened 10 years ago. It was like, "Oh, wait, these are just regular people doing their regular
yeah.
life thing, and just because someone has published a book doesn't mean that they're so famous that we can no longer interact." So I that's a great tip. How do you find them? Like, we went to the author's website and just filled out his contact form, right? But how are you finding the people that you wanna talk to?
It's actually easier than ever now. Just what you just said. It's usually an email or their website in the back flap of the book, literally. So it's not, and if not, just Google it.
Yeah. They're not putting that in there just because it looks pretty.
No, no, and just pay them a sincere compliment, and ask them if you can chat with them, and especially in the virtual world now, that's an easy layup.
Yeah, I found something that works really well for me, and I'm really big on this. I think I actually have posted on LinkedIn several times. It's like, I want to find out what their revenue model is. That's really important to me that I understand where they're coming from a business standpoint, because I want
Yeah,
to make sure that if I'm either a customer or I'm not a customer. If I'm a potential customer, make sure that I'm speaking to that. But if I know that I'm just not their ideal customer, they're not selling something that I need, then I'm respectful of that. And I know basically I'm reaching out asking for some free time because I know I'm not going to become a customer. So that really does change the way that I interact with them and how much I'm going to be brave and reach out. Have you found that has made a difference in your business? Like people are like, hey, I have a joint venture. Let's go do something together. People who are like, hey, I just want to pick your brain. Tell me the difference between those two things.
Yeah, I usually know at the beginning of a call, and then so you don't forget, remind me to give you three things that the listeners can do when they reach out to these people. But for the most part, I haven't had the latter where people just want to quote unquote pick your brain. 'Cause if they start with, that's
Mhm.
not what you're there for. And if they, so that's their opening comment, you might want to redirect them. That's all. Usually it's a win-win. That's a JV. However, we've had people as recent as last week reach out, like an intern, for example, at a college, and I'm happy, more than happy to help them. He heard us on a, I don't know, podcast or maybe saw my book and said, I want to intern. And we've had that like once a year for the last 3 years. Glad to help. That's a different scenario, right? When you're reaching out, here's a simple 3-step thing that I tell people. It could be any industry, it doesn't have to be real estate, but find someone and I don't care if you read the book or podcast, find someone in the niche that you think you want. So in other words, there's so many cool niches in real estate, right? Pick one that you think you can get behind in for your own reasons. Like in ours, it's all about helping people. It's kind of win-win. That's not every niche, right? Second, find someone in that niche that you can relate to. And this is the point about reaching out. When I say relate to, I mean in every way, Emma. So morally, ethically, their lifestyle, because there are a lot of people in real estate and outside of real estate, entrepreneurs that have huge success, but they wreck their family or they wreck relationships over it. That's not
Yeah.
so make sure it's everything you want to follow. And then third, put the blinders on for 3 years and follow them. Because again, we said at the very beginning of the show, this is not new and this is not brain science. If someone's already done it and they're where you want to be, or they're on the path of just ahead of you, but if you use those 3 steps, you'll have a great experience. But you got to put the blinders on once you for step 3 for 3 years minimum, 3 to 7 years, they say, because it takes that long, right?
Yeah, I think that well, I mean, I often say that real estate investors, we think about our lives in 5-year increments. Maybe even 10-year increments because you the first time you especially a commercial deal or rental house that you're gonna keep for 5 or 10 years, you really need to start planning your life in those chunks. Like, I'm going to refinance this in 3 years or 5 years, and that's gonna change the cash flow position. Or with us, when we first started our shift from leaving the W-2, my husband was working and keeping the lights on, right? And so I had a 5-year plan where I'm just gonna invest for yield. I'm gonna invest for high
That's awesome.
returns. I don't need the cash flow, right? He's working and he's keeping the lights on. But then that transition from yield and high return over to cash flowing stuff, that didn't happen overnight. We had another 3-year, 3 to 5 year plan to get our equity moved over into things that were cash flowing more. And then we've got the 5-year plan after that. It's like, okay, once we got our cash flow game figured out, which we still don't. I mean, it's always like this, right?
It's always a
And
cycle.
yeah, and so just being able to say, okay, after we got our cash flow thing kind of smoothed out a little bit, we have another 5-year plan where we're going to start investing for high returns again and that kind of snowball stacking properties. But these are all like 5-year chunks of time. And I don't think most people who are getting involved in real estate and they'll reach out to a coach, I'm really going to accelerate my game, are really thinking about that these things are long tail types of investments. So dive into that a little bit more where you're talking about you're putting your blinders on.
Yeah, most definitely. A couple of things you said are really cool. So I talked about this recently because unfortunately, back to the marketing thing, there's a lot of different niches being marketed heavy, but most of them are this can happen tomorrow for you or get rich quick.
Yeah.
And yet you have equity partners that'll buy a business and look for a 5 to 10 year window. So yeah, I think this is super important. Why I say 3 to 7, by the way, I used to say 3 all the time. I thought just look, if you commit to 3 years, it doesn't mean it takes you that long to do a deal. But if you commit for 3 years, I know when you hit a speed bump, you won't go sideways on me.
Yep.
Well, then I had Brian Tracy on my show. He's like 82. This is during COVID. And I gave him my 3 year philosophy. And most people agree, especially if they're a guest on the show. He didn't. He said, no, no, no. It's 7 years. He said, I've been broke. I've been wealthy. It takes 3 years where you're going to be frustrated and you're probably going to really suck at something. And then 2 or 3 years where you feel like you've adequately paid and you're getting it. And then the last year or two, you're going to have your breakthrough. And it made a ton of sense. So I say the 3 to 7. But yeah, I think especially in real estate, because there's so many shiny objects, I call it, whatever you end up doing, if you follow what I said earlier, give it the 3 to 7 justification, or you're going to be frustrated. What's cool about what we do, you and I were talking about before the show, is our model is a little bit of kind of active and then passive because when you put a deal in place, it can last 2 to 10 years, the way creative real estate works. And that's pretty neat. So you can start to chart this, so to speak, on a spreadsheet and know that you have income that far out. And at some point, get off the treadmill for 6 months or a year and do what you want to do or scale it. Either one is fine.
Yeah, I had a guest on the show, I don't know, a month or so ago, Frank Shaw, and one thing that he said that really caught me was how passive income, he didn't use these words, but how best passive income is basically marketed as a scam because most people haven't finished putting in their time of trading their time for money. It's a 5 to 7 year process of trading your time for money for most high income people before they can really think about being financially free, retiring early, all of those things. He said, before that, people hear the message passive income. You shouldn't be trading your time for money. He said, you absolutely should be trading your time for money. It just needs to come in that 5 to 7 to 10 year time increments where you're just working your tail off to build this thing. And then you can kind of say, all right, well, now it's paying my expenses. What comes next? Right. And
And
I
actually
think
have a plan. Yeah.
exactly. I started making the retirement plan 2, 3 years before we thought we could retire because people talked a lot about the depression and the purposelessness after they become financially free, and this was the goal. Olympic athletes talk about it a lot too. They win that medal and they leave the Olympics, and the rate of suicide is actually much higher. And that really concerned me when I saw people who were performing or attempting to perform at this elite level, pouring all of themselves into something and then finally either achieving that goal or getting to the point where they had to call it and say, I'm in the minor leagues. I'm never really going to go play for the pros. I need to move on with my life. And there's this long period of purposelessness when they reach passive income. And I loved how you are talking about this is a process because you recognize, okay, I got to put my head down for a while. But also, once I hit there, what's next? What comes after that? How do these 5 to 10 year deals look? Do you find that with your students? Like they get so impatient
Yeah.
or they are so focused that they forget to make plans for after this thing.
Yeah, I'll give you another example. I think stories are better than theory always. So just last week we were on a mastermind call. I coached a higher level still personally. And one of the women said, and I called her on it later on personally, because she said, well, it's been a year and I thought I'd be further ahead and, to do deals. And I said, how long have you been at your job? 25 years, she said. So, okay, 25 years and she makes a good salary. I think she makes a couple hundred grand. I said, okay, so 25 years you gave and you're at 200 grand. Whereas one of our deals can be six figures. So you need to give yourself a little more leeway than the 1 year, even though they all commit to 3 years when they come in, 'cause that's what I have them do. That was
Mhm.
a direct example of, yeah, they got too frustrated too early. Exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, one of my best seller financing deals is a 6 figure deal, but it's like what you're saying. It's the 3 paydays. I'm not just having somebody dumping 100 or 150 grand in my lap. It was the amount of down payment he gave me when he took over the house because I sold it on a seller note. And then the rent I'm collecting during that period of time. And then eventually when he refinances me out with the balloon comes due, then
Right.
I get a ton of equity. But it's the 3 paydays. And I'm sitting around waiting a long time in between paydays. And so you hear 6 figure deal, and it's important to factor in the time that, okay, I need 4 or 5 or 6 of these things cooking at once so that they're coming out of the oven. It's like the opposite of Thanksgiving where you want it all coming out of the oven warm at the same time. And this way
No, I
you
agree.
need them
Nice
all coming
stagger.
out very,
Yeah.
yeah,
That's what I
yeah.
meant when you sort of stack. I call it stacking. You get like 12 of these. I never forget when I did my first 12, it was like 2013 in this space. And I said, wow, it's kind of cool. So that it went over a million. It was like 1.2. And then of course, like you said, they're all staggered. Well, that's good quality income. By the way, that's a good model, the three pitches you just said. And we trademarked it a little differently for Red Tone, but it's the same concept you just said. And that's good for any business model. If you think about it, cash now, too many people do the transactional. It's just a job, but then you have monthly cash flow that kicks in, then the long-term wealth. It's a perfect model.
Yeah, it takes some patience, and one of them isn't gonna change my life. Even one apartment building, people hear that, "Oh, you own however many rental units, however many multifamily buildings." I feel like the cash flow takes longer on commercial deals
Yeah,
because there's
I
so
agree.
much stuff to do and the expenses are so high. It's almost like flipping in slow motion to get at those paydays.
Yeah, I
Do you
agree.
find the
I
same
definitely
thing?
agree.
When you're doing
Um,
a deal, you're kinda having to plan out, "Okay, this payday here, that," and kind of figuring out where all that's gonna come from.
yeah, our pays are slightly different. So I'll talk for the community, then I'll talk us, our family company. So our family company first does like 75 grand on average for all three paydays. So the payday one is like 20 something grand and the back end's 30 something and then between. The community runs because they're in different price ranges, a low of 45,000 to a high of a quarter of a million. So yeah, I mean, they can usually live, quote unquote, live or survive on their payday ones and twos while they wait. But the threes out of the bigger hits, to your point.
Oh, and that's what a lot of people I think are missing out when they're doing their planning for their I guess their exit plan. When you call it like, I don't want to run my business anymore. I don't want this W-2 anymore and trying to figure out how this is going to work. And the other thing that is in it for me is the unpredictable nature of what we do. So sometimes I have equity out there that's going to come in, like you said, that third payday and something happens. We recently had one where I purchased it on a subject to, and the seller or the previous owner passed away. And I'm like,
Yeah, I
okay,
got it.
yeah, this changes everything. So, how much of that, like when we're raising capital, we get soft commits. We figure about 50% of the soft commits will actually fund so that we can plan on how much we need to have soft committed so that then we can go and actually close and
Yeah.
close on the deal itself. What do you find for your predictability or rate on money you have coming out later, your accounts receivable? Do you find that it's reliable for you?
Yeah, we have like a 5 to 10% default rate when we put a buyer in, because similar to owner financing, but they're in a rental vehicle. So we have
Mhm.
about a 5 to 10% default rate on that. But that's not always bad, Evan, because if, like we haven't recently, where we just put it right back on the conventional market and sold it off, right? If we had longer term in there, we would have put another rental buyer in there. But at least we know, yeah, 5 to 10. So we budget on 10%, just so we don't, you don't pre-spend that or commit to another deal.
Yeah. Oh, pre-spending. That's such a good way to put it because you got it on a credit card, and then suddenly you're like, "Oh, yeah, that did not work out how I thought it was
It
gonna
didn't
work out."
close or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, we had one we put on the market, and our partner was a commercial appraiser. And so she was really keeping her eye on the value of that project the entire time that we owned it. One of our other partners was a commercial broker, and we
Always
had
helps.
two commercial brokers that we were gonna have list the property for us that gave us their BPOs or their opinion on the price value. And all 4 of those were in line. And we thought, "Okay, we're ready to market." And we felt like we had the NOI where it needed to be that we could put it out there. So we stuck it out there and we got several offers on it and they were all coming in the same amount, but much, much lower. And we
Oh,
rejected
wow.
the first couple, and then we got a couple more that were almost identical within 100 or $200,000 of each other. And we're just sitting there like, I think we just learned a really important lesson here that this is only worth what people are willing to pay for
The
it. It
buyer's
doesn't
willing to
matter
pay.
the BPOs, it doesn't matter the appraisals, it doesn't matter what CoStar says. And that was a tough lesson for us to be like, okay, well, that money that we were planning on earning from this, it just didn't materialize. We still made money on it, but it wasn't near what we were expecting. And I'm really glad that I didn't have a bunch of credit cards filled up planning on when we sold this thing. And you know what? It also caught fire during the
Oh,
sale
really?
process. So that slowed it down 3 or 4 months while we had to go through that rebuild process to get it back on the market. And so it's like the unpredictable nature of it. I feel like I just discount everything 25% of what I have out
No,
there.
that's smart. I agree. Yeah, yeah. And so you're not betting on it.
Yeah, exactly. And so it helps me get more deals into play though. But what do you do at the point where where you are, you're reliant completely on your business to be paying your bills and you never intended to be coaching. That's almost like bonus income there. What advice can you give to our listeners about how to plan their trajectory
Yeah.
and there's a lot of stress when you know that there's no safety net. So how do you build in those safety nets and how do you plan ahead so you can stay sane?
Yeah, a couple things. Everybody has a different palette for this, right? So we've been helping people sort of exit their W 2. We call it escape the W 2 since 14, like literally a few a year. So all of our coaches, for example, used to have W 2s and they exited. When I say it's a different palette, one may say, I need like 2 deals going and I'll take the leap. Others might say, I need all this money in the bank. But the point is, because we've done it so many times, and the case generally talking to your listener would be, go find someone who did it, same answer as before, and then sit down and plan it because every niche has their metrics, right? So in ours, we usually do it within 2 years for someone. How? Well, we know what the 3 paydays can do. We know what their income needs to be replaced, and it becomes that predictable. So Mike, the most recent one, it was Mike in California. He said, "Look, 24 months, I want to do it." It took us like 26 or 27, but that's super close. It's that predictable. We helped a guy recently in New Hampshire, Rick, leave the government after 30 years. It's a long time at a W 2. And we did that the same way. Let's stack up X amount of these paydays to replace your income, which was strong, and then make your exit. So just predictability of having someone who's already gone through it. That's all.
Yeah, I heard the analogy here. I don't know how applicable it is. But we have a son who was diagnosed with autism and ADHD when he was a kid. And we sat down with the therapist and she just said, look, I've seen this kid 100 times, meaning people only come in so many flavors.
Yeah.
Situations only come in so many flavors. The details are always vastly different. And that's what keeps things interesting. But the category, the archetype is the same. And she said, I'm just going to map out how I see this go for other parents who have kids very similar to your kid. And she said, you're either going to do this or you're going to do that. And I'm just going to make it easy for you. You have to pick from one of these two things, which path you want to go down. She said, because you're going to try to do path number 3. And I'm here to tell you that is not going to work. I know that that's your knee jerk reaction. It's everybody's knee jerk
Yeah.
reaction. That is not going to work. So I'm going to turn your attention over to these other two paths and you know what we did? We did the third path that she told us not to, and it didn't work. And then
Yep.
we said we remembered her advice and we backed up and we said, okay, we have these other two options here. Let's seriously consider doing those. And it was much more off the beaten trail. It was much less mainstream and it was a difficult mental transition for us. So, and from what you're saying, it sounds pretty similar. You have somebody who's telling you, like, "Hey, this is what you could expect. I've seen it 100 times. I've met you 100 times." Do you see that people have various levels of trust in you to be able to take the advice, or people like, "No, I'm paying you for advice. I'm going to do what you say." Or how do you handle
No,
that
I
when
wish
it's
it were
kind
that easy.
of
Yeah, I wish it was the latter. No, because everybody brings different baggage to the table, right? I mean, not in a bad way. Like when we meet them, all of the stuff happened for the last 30 years, 20 years, 40 years, whatever. I can't change that. What I can do is start working on the mental game to help them through that. Because we haven't hit that at all when we talk about all this coaching stuff and the mental stuff you asked me earlier. But the fact is that if it was as easy as here's how you do a real estate deal, I'd have everybody doing successful.
yeah,
The other we call it our genius model, Emma. It's the skill set, sure, but you can learn that by watching 400 deals of ours on YouTube. Then why does everybody do it? Because it's the systems and then the mindset is a big piece. That's the other three. The other two things are the three genius model, and the mindset piece comes into play with what you just asked. Because I don't know what's been in there for that many years. And so we have to work through a lot of that. I wish, again, it was just about the skill set, but it's not. It's how to become an entrepreneur. It's not easy. And so I wish it was, yeah, I got blind faith. No, they got to unpack a lot of stuff usually mentally.
yeah. I think that was plain to me when I had a partner. He was much younger than me, but he was raised in an extremely wealthy and politically powerful family. And when I found this out about him, I said, well, just tell me about what that was like as a kid being raised in this family. He told me some good stuff and he told me some bad stuff. I mean, everything comes with two sides, right? But one thing that he
Yeah.
said really caught my attention. He said, I never ask myself if I deserve this. I never ask myself if I can do it. And I never ask myself if it will ever be successful. I don't ever doubt that I will be successful. And he said, that's a lot of head junk that you've been
Yeah.
dealing with the last 20 years that I never had to deal with and why I was just able to jump into this right out of the gate.
Yeah. You just said it. Yeah, that's the baggage. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, tell me about those 3 things that you mentioned. We've got skills, nuts and bolts, like what we talked about a little bit at the beginning, and
Yep.
we've got the mindset. What was the third one? Tell me a little bit more about
Systems.
those. Okay.
Systems. We call them our genius model because all three are important to teach. You can't just do one, right? So the mindset we'll bring people into our community that specialize in that. Dr. Amanda comes to mind, but there's been a lot. Brian Tracy's in that category, right? Just the mindset stuff. And then the systems is more in the trenches to operate like you would have for your multis, right? Or your commercial. So that's just niche specific. It's the skill set and the mindset of the biggies. I think mindset's most of it, to be honest with you. We were at a RIA speaking in Vermont, my son-in-law and I recently, and one of the guys came up to him and said, I just figured out it's so crazy how much the mental game here affects us because he's
Yeah.
running all these students that all want the same thing, but take action at different paces. Well, it's because of the mental game.
Take action at different paces. I like that because sometimes we make the other side of that a negative analysis paralysis or these kinds of things. But if people have their own pace for taking action, I'll just throw some money at it and see what happens, right? Or they're out there making it happen, but they're making mistakes because they're firing before they're aiming all the way to the other side for the people who just really never end up taking action. Is there a sweet spot there that you found? Maybe personality type, and can it be learned from people who are too far on either end of that extreme?
I can tell you when I look at our avatar, who historically has been more successful, there's a few things
Mhm.
that come to mind. There's like 10 criteria, but they've either witnessed or been in a family business. And we tend to attract that and they tend to have great success. And the engineering background, for whatever reason, has been super successful in our community. I don't know if it's because of the technical aspect. And that anyone that's not afraid of the phone, like maybe a sales background or just a good communicator. Because real estate, I don't care what niche you're in, you'd be hard pressed to not communicate well, except for if you're doing I know there's some land flips and things you can do online. Other than that, you're communicating with people nonstop. So those are sort of the avatars that have been successful with us. And then quite frankly, I'm the people that come from podcasts because they don't listen to a half hour or an hour show if they're not into self-improvement, right? So they tend to be great in our community because they're sponges for the material.
Yeah, that's a good point. Podcasts, they're long form and you're hanging out with some people. And
Yeah.
sometimes my guests, they or listeners will tell me, I usually try and listen to it 1.2 or 1.5x, but sometimes you have a guest who you need to listen to 1x because it's so much information and it's so far above their head and it's different for everybody. One person
Yeah.
will be just 1.5xing through somebody and the other person will be like, oh, like that was so much stuff. I had to slow down. But
Yeah.
the commitment to that people really stand out. But we talk about this attention thing, like we have a 3-second attention span. If you don't grab their attention in 3 seconds, they're gone. Why do you think that is with podcasts? They're willing to sit and listen for 45 minutes to an hour to people
Again, I
talking.
think I know it's a big audience, but I think it's an audience of people that are into constant improvement and they know it and they know that that takes time, right? Because every show, I mean, there's some tiny short shows, like 10-minute shows, but most of them are at least 20 minutes plus. And so they're into constant improvement or they wouldn't be on there. So it tends to be great. We're going to give away the book on your show. Well, I know if people go through that and they already sat through the show, then that's a great committed person.
Yeah. I didn't start a podcast for a while, a couple of years. I fought against it. I knew that podcasting was the thing, right? I had a friend of mine actually from even before I started my real estate business that he was one of the original podcast. I think he had like podcast number 9, something like that. And he was
Wow.
always telling me like podcasting is amazing. You need to get into it. And then when I started into commercial real estate, especially people like, oh, I raise all the money off my podcast, or you need a podcast, or whatnot. And I just fought against it so hard because I knew it was a 2 to 5 year commit. I knew that you can't just, we just hit year one and we're just starting to get traction, feeling like people are listening, people are responding, people are reaching out. And so I wasted a lot of time because I knew that if I was going to do it, I needed to commit. How can you get somebody, or is it just that's the way they are? How do you get somebody to that point where they're like, yeah, I know I need to do it, but I'm not ready because I know it's going to be a big commitment. It's kinda like me when I'm
Yeah.
listening to a podcast, I'll see the timestamp on it, 45 minutes or an hour 10, and I'm like, I just don't have it right now. Like, I gotta psych myself up to even listen to this much content because I know it's gonna push my mindset, and that
Mm.
is mentally taxing, so I have to get kinda psyched up for it. Do you feel like that's part of the process, or do you get frustrated when people are
I
spending
I
too
think
much
it's
time
part of the
together?
process, but I think the way to break through it is to find out their why. Like if every one of my clients, I have a good sense of their why, and if I don't, then I'm not gonna be able to help them. So their why is going to tell me how fast or slow they want to go, and their why is going to be what I remind them of when they hit the speed bumps or start to pull back. All of the above.
Yeah. Okay, let's dive into that a little bit. I love the 7 layers of why exercise where you have somebody who's asking you that
Exactly.
back,
Yeah.
or even some
Yeah.
apps that you can do it self-guided. How do you really get down to the deeper level of why that gets people through the speed bumps?
Yep, I do essentially the 7 levels. So I'll say, send me your version of your why. And then I'll send it. And then I'll just start ripping apart each one. Why? What does it do for you? How does it make you feel? Who else does it affect? What's the end result of that? And literally every statement, you drill back those 4 questions or 5. That's now the emotion comes out. Not I
Mhm.
have this money goal or whatever.
Yeah. Most
Big
people are
difference.
crying by the end of that exercise. I've
Yeah.
done it in group settings before, in mastermind settings, and people are like, "I'm not gonna cry," right? And you stick them on the hot seat, and the facilitator will drill down, and most people, even if they're not crying, are realizing things that they didn't even know
Yeah.
were in.
Emotionally. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a powerful experience. How do you go through that with your students, and how can the listener, take themselves through that process?
I mean, I'll help them if they want to email me, but I tell my students, we're on Slack, our community. I tell our students,
Mhm,
just send me your version. If you're okay to being open to my critique, send me your version of it. And then I'll start those 4 questions that I said earlier, just start drilling down each one. So it starts with
mhm.
their version. I want an unbiased, give me what you think your why is type thing. That's how I start.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you my why. You tell me yours. What did you discover about yourself through this process?
Simple, create enough income to do the things income and wealth can't buy, which is create experiences at our stage for our grandkids and family.
How did you drill down to that point?
Well, for me, it's evolved, right? I just turned 58 yesterday, so it's not like overnight
Happy
think of
birthday.
this stuff. Thank you.
Yeah. So, well, take me back to where you started your original why that maybe you thought was powerful and how it's evolved into where you are right now.
It's the big what I said earlier. There was no emotion. It was really a goal, right? That's how people answer rather when you ask them that. And I was no different. So have all these goals, nothing to do with the emotional levels that you and I just talked about with the 7 levels. That's the big difference. from a one single goal to, yeah, but why, emotionally.
Yeah. Yeah. I started out, my husband had just been laid off and we had 6 kids still living at home when I think one was in college. And he got a recommendation letter from one of his executives at the company that laid him off. And she was saying, "Oh, he's going to do a great job." And then she put this line in there that just got me. And she said, "He is a sole income earner as a father of 6 children." And I sat back and I thought, wow, why did I let him get into that position? How is this even fair to him? And why am I not doing more to make sure that we're not putting ourselves in this situation? If I looked back on it and I had the words that I have now, I would have said, we have a single stream of income. That's risky. We need multiple streams of income, whether I'm deriving them or he's deriving them or they're passive or whatever. We need multiple streams of income. So that was the first why that I had. And so I started going out looking for some sort of a business I could do that was going to make more than the little, piano lessons and photography business that I had before. And I very quickly got into real estate. And within a couple of months, the goal went from layoff protection, multiple streams of income to I think this could actually lay him off. This has enough streams of income within this
Yeah.
business that it could become our 7 streams and it could retire him. Like I can lay off my own husband, right? And so 5 years later, when he got laid off in end of 2022, we were like, okay, all right, let's go do this thing. And so
Perfect.
the evolution of that and became from like, hey, we're going to hang out with dad more and we're going to get to go do more stuff and really prioritizing family. I loved how you said that at the beginning. People will build this and they'll lose their family along the way. So that was my powerful reason why was the time and the experience that you can spend. And I find that most people who drill down far enough, that's what they get to.
Yeah. And you said something important there, a little bit off topic, but you said risky with one stream of income.
Mhm.
I tell people that are looking at what we're doing, your job is your risk. 100%. Your job is your risk because there's too much uncertainty. And this is certain. I don't care what niche you jump into. It's certain if you go to the right person.
Yeah. I feel like what is it? I don't know who said this. Maybe it was me, and maybe I'll just trademark it. This is not a get rich quick scheme, but it is a guaranteed get rich someday.
Yeah. Over time.
Yeah. And it takes multiple deals. Like I said, it takes multiple niches. I feel like I can diversify inside of real estate sufficiently to have 7 distinct streams of income, one of those being the tax savings. That has been a huge driver for us because I'm a real estate professional. We have massive tax benefits. We're paying Trump style
Right.
taxes.
Right.
And some years we get a refund no matter what we do. There are no exemptions we're claiming anymore, right? We don't have a W 2 anymore. And so we do everything we possibly can to zero it out and we'll still get a huge refund. And we'll be like, well, there's a down payment on a new rental house, or let's go invest
Yeah.
that passively in a deal. And you just get to the point where you just have multiple income streams just by the nature of the business. So, what do you see with multiple income streams as people kind of wake up to that and realize my job, 1 to 2, if you have a spouse working, and how they can expand that?
It usually takes a deal, to be honest with you. If I'm tracking with it, usually takes that first transaction because then the confidence shoots up, their language changes, their demeanor changes, and then they start getting a little bit more exact. Because before that, it might be, depending on where their mindset is, it might be a little bit, it's not believable always until they get their first deal. At least in our space, that's been a game changer. So we work tirelessly then on getting them their first deal. Time to first deal is a metric we track. So it's super important. We tighten that because once someone does a deal, they're not going anywhere. And then they have that confidence to do what you just said.
Mhm. How do they do that 5 years of trading time for money, that 5 years of hustle, that 5 years of setting their stack up? Because you're looking at those almost as sacrifice years. We're doing this for more passive income so we can spend more time with our family, but then I gotta spend 5 to 7 years working really hard to do this in a stressful situation without losing the people that I'm doing this for. And you must have seen this time and again, people doing it well and people doing it poorly. What patterns can you tell us about so that people can get through these
Well,
sacrifice
and
years?
I think it's this. I called it a buffet. It's not a buffet where you can go. And again, it doesn't matter what niche, it doesn't have to be ours, but it's not a buffet where you go, okay, the mentor told me to do A, B, C, D, and you go through and you just pick which ones you think are going to, that you like. That's where they trip up for sure. That's when they take long. That's when they get frustrated and or quit.
Tell me more about what that looks
And
like. Give me an example.
yeah, that's the blinders that we talked about earlier. It's taking it blind faith for those 3 years, not second guessing what you think, not when your doubts creep in. It's taking the person that already did it that we talked about earlier, the 3 steps, and not deviating, not treating it like a buffet where you can pick. No, blinders on, exactly what they said to do until you get to the 3 years. Then you can stop playing.
So let's back that up to what you said is one of the big pitfalls of being afraid of the phone. That's a big problem for me. I love inbound leads. I want to put a podcast out there. I want to post on LinkedIn. I want to do all a YouTube channel. I want to do all the things. And then people reach out and call me. And instead of me reaching out to my ideal investor, I'm
Yeah.
afraid of the phone. I was a cold caller was my first job when I was 15 years old. I've been in sales my entire life. And I think I just still, after all these years and all this training, all this time, still just kind of afraid of the outreach and the phone. So let's take that example where somebody's going to the buffet. I'm going to do this and this, but I don't want any of that phone stuff. I'm
Yeah.
afraid of the phone. And then it stops
Usually
working.
that's script, meaning if you knew exactly what to say with the next question, or the next commonly asked question, or the next, you can't wait to, but it's script. So how we get them over that is we actually have them send us calls and
Hmm.
critique those calls. And then they go back and put that in action and they come back and do the next one. You can hear the change going on with those that are willing to do that. That's not easy either to succumb to
Yeah.
that. That's the fastest way to close the learning gap. So
Just getting it done and then having the review and
critique so
refining
you
it.
get better, then you can't wait to get on the phone because you know what, you know, commonly asked questions. There's not 100 of them. There's probably 10, let's just say,
Yeah.
in your niche. So you get really good at those and you can't wait to get on the phone. If
Yeah.
remember, everything goes back to the why we talk. So if your why is big enough, you'll learn the scripts. And if you learn the scripts, you'll be more confident. And if you're more confident, you'll get more deals.
Mhm. Well, this is probably where a lot of people have tripped up. I mean, I grew up in the era of we only have 4 or 5 channels on TV. I'm up at 11 o'clock at night, and I know I should be in bed, but a Carlton Sheets commercial comes on, and
Yeah.
I'm 14 years old watching Carlton try and tell me how awesome real estate is. And I never bought it. I was 14, right? But I know a lot of people who purchase those from Carlton Sheets actually, he's the thing, right? People say he's legit. He teaches you a real thing. But the reason they didn't do it or the reason they quit doing it honestly, was because of all the phone calling. It was the
Yeah.
hustle and grind of getting out there and
Almost any
doing it.
business. Yeah. It can be a deterrent. Yep.
Yeah, definitely. But people get into this for passive income and private jets and Lamborghinis, and they don't realize this is a business
Yeah.
for at least 5 to 7 years that you've gotta
Yeah.
you know,
Every niche.
yeah. For me, passive income is a huge, huge, huge driver. And so I was very careful the way that I built and structured my business that it had a 5 to 7 year life cycle. Because especially in commercial, every deal you buy is a 5 year commit. And so I was getting down to the years 3 and 4, and I thought, I can't actually buy any more deals because then the winding down time is extended, or the only deals I can get into that I have to be passive kind of out of the gate. Do you find that at a certain point, the structure of the deals change as your exit plan comes closer?
I think the biggest thing that comes to mind with that is the size and the type of deal, meaning in our case, we just get a lot more pickier than throwing
Mhm.
deals in a funnel as you progress. And that's different for everybody because some people do come in financially set up well already and they're just playing. When you talk about the size of our deals, 6 figures, most people don't have to go out and do 40 of those, right? They can do a few and really change your life. So yeah, I
Mhm.
think they just get more pickier the more comfortable that we get.
Yeah, I've definitely
Picky and
gotten
choosy.
pickier, but not just pickier on the financial metrics of a deal. I've become a lot more picky on the time requirements of a deal because to me, diversifying my deals across time spent is just as important as diversifying across geographic areas or asset type or
I agree.
whatnot.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, especially you've been at this longer than me and you're a little bit older than me. I always feel like the grandma in the room. I love when somebody's coming in who's the same age as me or a little bit older and telling me how they're doing it. Let me ask for a little bit of selfish advice before we wrap up. What do you tell people like me who were 40 or 50 when they're starting?
I would again, remember before I said somebody already did it. So I'd then point out to all the entrepreneurs that started later. The Kentucky Fried Chicken example is amazing. I don't think he started until he's 70 something. There's plenty of people that have done that. And if you Google that, by the way, you probably get 5 examples. That's what I tell you to do. Go Google someone who started a little bit even older than you and then say, what was the success? And they're breakthrough stories. They're not small stories.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I talked to somebody on the podcast recently. She's in her 50s, already has grandchildren, and she has no intention of starting a real estate business, but she's starting like her retirement life a little bit early. And she basically taught me because I'm almost 50, and she was saying, she's like, life starts at 50. She says, I don't think you realize what you're just about to go into here as your
See,
nest
that's
and
mindset.
business.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Because a lot of people will be like, oh, 50, I'm too old. There's no way I can catch up and retire early. I'd be lucky if I can retire at 65. Well, those 15 years are going to go by anyway.
Right.
What are you going to do with them? It's all, like you said, it's all mindset. It's all mindset.
It is.
Maybe
It is.
10% technique. And that's free. I get the technique from, I can call you, I can get on YouTube. The technique is free. Read a book that I checked out from a library.
And again, find the person who did it. Exactly. And that's not, doesn't cost you 10 cents.
Yeah. Well, I think the reason the value of coaching and the types of things that you're offering, that's the value. It's not just accountability because it's like a personal trainer who comes in and it's the difference between a workout buddy that you know is going to show up. And if you don't show up, he's going to be like, you're flaky. Where are you? Versus a personal trainer that you are paying to not only meet you there and hold you accountable, but also to be able to give you some of that work through this. You can do it because he knows all the tricks on how to get
Yeah,
people to
exactly.
work out harder. Yeah. So tell me about the value of the free versus the paid content. I have very strong feelings about this. I'm all with Alex Hormozy. Like your free stuff should be better than other people's paid stuff. I put out a lot of free stuff. There's a certain
Yeah.
point people aren't paying attention until they're paying.
Yep. There's a fine line. I'm big on free only because, like the book we did and other things, because it's a different reason. I want the person who looks at our stuff to be able to get enough information so that they are committed. They're not coming at us going, I want to dip my toe in the water and try. That never's
Yeah.
going to work. And then, yes, it becomes a point where, okay, now you know this is your niche. This is that step of the 3 steps. Okay, I picked my niche. Okay, then now, yeah, then now you've got to educate yourself and invest in yourself for sure. So there's just there's a transition there.
Oh, that's a great way to put it. So you're taking people through a commitment funnel almost. It's like,
Really, it's what it is. I mean, I'm saying it that way, but yeah, that's logically how I feel about some of our free stuff that we have. There's enough out there, so you don't have to dip your toe in until you see enough. Like, there's 400
Mhm.
deals on YouTube. Go watch them, see if that's the type of thing you want to do,
Yeah.
and then the book, and then say, okay, great, this is something I want to get after. Now, okay,
Yeah.
now you got to invest.
Yeah, when you're ready to commit, here we are. That's almost like the
Yeah,
pay people are like, "Oh, it's behind a paywall, it's behind a paywall," and nobody wants to pay to get behind the paywall because they're not committed. But when they get to that down to that point where they're like, "Now I'm committed, I'm ready to pay so that I'm paying attention," that's where I
right,
wanna step in and say, paying now has become an accountability tool for you rather than to get at the information behind the paywall. The
right,
information should, in my opinion, should be free. The paywall comes when they're ready to commit.
right. No, I agree. I definitely agree. There's a transition there.
Awesome stuff. So we'll take us forward to your next 5-year period of time. What are some of your new whys that are emerging? Some of your bucket list items that either you have had on your bucket list. I like to hear about the ones that have been on your bucket list for a really long time and you're finally like, it's happening. So can you tell us about what the next 5 years look like for you?
Yeah, so it's there now, and that my son and son-in-law are both running most of the stuff we do, whether it's properties or coaching. And
Hmm.
then a 30-year goal of ours was to build a home to create those experiences I talked to you about earlier. And that it just happened. We just finished that about 2 or 3 months ago. So that's really cool.
Yeah, I call it
That's
the grandma cabin village, the
yeah,
family
nice.
property. So
Yeah,
you're basically putting together a place wwhere the family can come and gather and spend time.
100%. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. What does that look like for you?
Time wise or what?
Well, just the whole setup. I mean, because if it's far enough away, nobody can come visit. People, it's the lake house that nobody ever uses. Like,
Oh,
how
gotcha.
do you build that?
We went there for years and years. So it literally been going there for over 30 years. It's only like
Mhm.
4 hours. Yeah.
Okay.
So people can get in.
Yeah. And so it's a place you guys know that you like to spend time and you do that. How much time are you planning on spending in that location?
Probably 4 or 5 months, if you added it all up.
So going a couple times a year for a
Yeah.
couple weeks in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a little jealous about the grandkid thing.
Yeah. We have two.
Yeah, I feel like I'm more ready for grandkids than my kids are, when I never thought I'd be like that. I'd be like, "Oh, whatever, it's a big commitment, do it when you're ready," but
Yeah.
now
No,
I'm
it's
kinda like,
awesome.
"Yeah, yeah, it's fun." It's definitely powering a lot of what I'm doing right now, so I can be ready for the grandkids when they show up,
That's cool.
you know, have the grandma property and be ready to drop things and get out there, so, anything else that you wanna share with the audience that you feel like we did not cover, either inspiration-wise or piece of information that could help them?
Nope. I mean, we nailed a bunch of stuff. Just go out there and find someone who's where you want to be and latch onto it. Don't look left, right, or backwards. Yeah, that's it. And no, it was a pleasure. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, it's really fun to get to know you, get to talk to you, and finding that you have that passion of helping people, not because you have to, because you're like trying to pay your bills. It's just you got to the point where you felt like you had something to offer and people were asking for it and you put it out there. And those are the kind of teachers that I personally really like to work with.
I
People who
appreciate
are
it.
actually doing the thing and they're teaching it because they want to, not because they have to. So thanks for being a good example of that in the industry.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Reach out to Chris, smartrealestatecoach.com or Chris at smartrealestatecoach.com. And be sure to jump in with us, partnerwithrise.com if you want to get on our calendar. Like, we don't just do this podcast so that we can make each other feel smart. We do it because we want to talk to you. So jump out, partnerwithrise.com. And if you want to jump in on our Monday Night Club, it's totally free. We look at deals, we network, and that is at riseclubcapital.com. I also have a new calendar link where you can jump right to my calendar. Partner with Rise takes you to like the pool. You can talk to me, you can talk to my partners. You never know who you're going to get. If you want to take your chances and meet some new people, that's a great way to do it. But if you want to get on my calendar directly, just go to investwithemma.com and make an appointment. And please feel free to talk to us. I'll tell you all about all the things, right? Just like that author did that my husband reached out to. Thanks, Chris. And we
Thank
will
you.
catch you. I guess I'll be on your podcast coming up here pretty soon.
Awesome. See you soon then.
All right. Talk to you soon.